From 1619 to this day, slavery has been legal and practiced in the United States. The 13th Amendment, co-authored by the former Confederate Vice President, generals, colonels, cabinet officers, and Congress members in 1865, authorized slavery based on racistly created, targeted, and enforced criminal laws, or black codes. Up to the early 1960s, the criminalized black people recently removed from the corporate plantations and their descendants, and then leasing those people to the same plantations, cotton fields, coal mines, and railways they had recently been released from up to this day. The guilty pleas of John S. Williams in 1921 and Bobby Paul Edwards in 2018 are horrifying evidence of the continuation of slavery. Michael Coard is an attorney, radio host, columnist for the Philadelphia Tribune, and opinion contributor for the Capital Star, writing, "Slavery never really ended because the 13th Amendment still allows it. People think the 13th Amendment repealed slavery. It didn't. It just created slavery by another name." On April 12, 2022. I'll read an abridged version, but I encourage you to read the full article linked in the description below. America owes us big time for slavery, from 1619 to 1865, and convict leasing slavery from 1865 to 2022 and beyond. The 13th Amendment did not end slavery in 1865. Black people are still being enslaved in modern-day America. The 13th Amendment reads, except as punishment for crime. That means slavery and involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. Instead of allowing enslavement of people simply because they were black, the 13th Amendment still allows the enslavement of people simply because of racistly created, racistly targeted, and racistly enforced criminal laws. Laws known as black codes were passed for the sole purpose of the criminalization of recently freed, quote-unquote, blacks along with their descendants. The result of the cowardly compromise that allowed the defeated traitorous South to co-author the amendment, former Confederate Vice President, 4 former Confederate generals, 5 former Confederate colonels, 6 former Confederate cabinet members, and 58 former Confederate Congress members. That explains everything. Because the 13th Amendment allowed for slavery, the South immediately criminalized recently freed, quote-unquote, blacks by creating and selectively enforcing vagrancy, loitering, and curfew laws. They also created and selectively enforced laws that made it illegal for blacks to refuse exploitative and abusive so-called jobs. And if blacks violated any of those or similar black codes, they were sent to prisons that, quote, convict leased, end quote, them on the same plantations and cotton fields and coal mines and railways they had recently been, quote unquote, freed from. Slavery in the United States did not end in 1865. Use of peons thrived throughout the South for over 5 decades. Although Congress outlawed peonage in 1867, police and courts usually turned a blind eye. Law enforcement even arrested blacks on false charges to maintain a supply of manpower for the local farmers. One of those farmers, Williams, managed his farm like a brutal dictator. At night, peon laborers were crowded into bunkhouses whose windows were nailed shut and doors locked and secured with a chain. Whippings were handed out daily for picking less cotton than other field hands. On Sundays, the Williams took their dogs out for practice by forcing a black peon laborer to run through the woods for the hounds to chase. I'm uncontrollably crying tears of rage right now. One laborer escaped the farm in November of 1920 and fled to Atlanta Bureau of Investigation. He reported the horrors. On February 18, 1921, 2 agents interviewed Williams, who lied about his modern-day enslavement of and brutality against black laborers. But Williams was very worried. So Williams concocted a plan to get rid of several of the laborers. Williams and 2 coerced farmhands sadistically murdered 11 black laborers by hacking them to death with axes, or by drowning them after weighing them down with rocks before throwing them off the bridge into the Yellow River, or by blasting them with a shotgun. The drowned bodies were found March 16th and the death farm became national news. His trial began April 5th, 1921. Williams was found guilty. Southern slavery never stopped, not ever. John Christopher Smith, beginning in 2009, was forced by Bobby Paul Edwards to labor for over 100 hours a week without pay for 5 years at a South Carolina restaurant. Edwards would abuse Smith by punching him, beating him with a belt, hitting him with pots, and using metal tongs that had been dipped into hot grease to burn his neck. Edwards pleaded guilty in 2018 to one count of forced labor, sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to submit back pay to Smith of over $545,000. By the way, black inmates at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, for example, are still forced to pick cotton on the prison plantation for 2 cents an hour. America owes us more than $545,000, much more, from 1619 to 2022 and beyond. Reparations, anyone? The first thing that is necessary to address is the maliciousness of the half-truths that the government and corporate-produced textbooks continue to teach Americans to this day. If you would ask an American today, did you ever learn that slavery was abolished? They will likely say yes. This fact alone is reason to distrust the rest of whatever comes out of the mouth of those who regurgitate taglines and don't actually read the laws themselves, the 13th Amendment. This lie about the abolishment of slavery is not only dangerous to our conscious, but our subconscious as well. The more we hear and the more we feel like we're living in a post-slavery society, instead of living in a slave society, we let our subconscious believe that we live in a free world, when nothing could be further from the truth. Every person in this country is one judge ruling away from becoming a slave, whether you have committed the crime or not, because let's remember that not everyone sentenced to jail or prison because of a crime actually committed the crime. And the number of falsely enslaved individuals in the United States, yes, it's better to say enslaved now than imprisoned because that's what the Constitution says. But it also doesn't touch on the fact that many of these crimes were based out of anti-black and anti-poor laws that seek to criminalize behavior that goes against any sort of authoritarian rule. So to wrap up this first point, I would encourage you to begin saying enslaved rather than imprisoned or jailed, because that is what the amendment says. Slavery shall exist for punishment of a crime. The second point is that this is why it should be no surprise that the United States has 1/4 of the world's prisoners. That's about 25% of the world's entire prison population, but the United States has only 5% of the world's population. This is how the United States is still able to be the world's economic leader when it's based its entire country for hundreds and hundreds of years on non-criminalized slavery from the 1600s to the 1800s to criminalized slavery from the 1800s to the present day and beyond, that have been inherently racialized and justified through biased media and unconscious bias that people learn growing up, passed down through generations. This country was never an honest country and never will be, because honesty is anti-American. This country made its riches on exploitation and degrading people, and teaching uneducated people to hate each other for various reasons instead of realizing that they were all part of a system of economic exploitation, whether they were a slave or even a plantation owner. It's an entire system of subjugation, one person over the other, as opposed to a community of mutual aid or support like many indigenous communities where resources aren't hoarded, but it's ensured that everyone has an adequate amount and there isn't one person that controls everything, because then they'll have the absolute power to abuse whomever they would like. And if they are either uneducated or just have a vendetta or have some other reason, they don't have compassion for others. So let's get this second point hammered down and straight, that the United States is the United States of slavery. Slavery was here before the United States were united, when they were just colonies, all the way up to the Emancipation Proclamation, and through the 13th Amendment, through the Black Codes, through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights era, through the Reagan era, through the Bush eras, through Obama, through Trump, through Biden. This has been the United States of slavery, enslaving 1/4 of the world's slaves, not prisons, not jails, not correctional facilities. Call them what they are, because our words are powerful and shape how we see the world. These are slave plantations that force people to work for major corporations and even the state for little or no pay. Now, the third point connects directly to that. The 13th Amendment really did nothing but put a fake litmus test on who could become a slave by saying you have to commit a crime. The corporations owned the slaves before, and the corporations own the slaves now. The author Michael Coard writes that it was Frederick Douglass who pointed out that, quote, states claim to be too poor to maintain state convicts within their own prison walls. Hence, the convicts are leased out to work for railway contractors, mining companies, large plantations, and other private companies. These companies assume charge of the convicts, work them as cheap labor, and pay the states a handsome revenue for their labor, end quote. This is still used today, and a simple search on the internet will show you which major corporations are using slaves in the United States. And that's before you even go into how many slaves they're using outside of the United States. But beyond just corporate slavery, it's important to note the peonage system too. The author notes that this use of peons thrived throughout the South for over 5 decades, and it did not start to decline until the brutal murder of 11 men in 1921. Although Congress outlawed peonage in 1867, local county police and courts throughout the South usually turned a blind eye to what was going on. Many local law enforcement officials even arrested blacks on false charges to maintain a supply of manpower for the local farmers. PBS defines peonage as the following. Peonage, also called debt slavery or debt servitude, is a system where an employer compels a worker to pay off a debt with work. The Encyclopedia of Arkansas writes that peonage is considered a form of slavery since the worker is essentially prohibited from leaving the control of the landowner. Peonage was declared illegal by Congress in 1867, and 2 of the most famous peonage investigations occurred in Arkansas during the first decades of the 20th century. I encourage you to do your own additional research on this issue, but this is the truth. This is not what I learned in school. There wasn't time spent on this when we discussed how slavery is still alive and well in the modern day. And there definitely hasn't been a discussion in the mainstream about the bondage a quarter of the world's enslaved population faces here in the United States. The fourth point is that the 2018 case shows that this slave system is not just in prison, folks, it's in everyday South Carolina restaurants, as well as a bunch of restaurants across the country and assumably the world. So everything I said before about how slavery is just a fake litmus test for committing a crime, I lied. Slavery exists whether you commit a crime or not, and is likely going to be thrown on the people with less resources and less privilege to get an education or to work a job where they won't be enslaved. This is what the police should be used for. This is what the FBI, the CIA, and other organizations that taxpayers spend their money on should be used for, because these are the people that don't have the power to represent themselves. They don't have a community with resources to help them. Instead, we have police chasing shoplifters and drug dealers when we could be having police on duty ensuring that no one in our lands are being enslaved. And this is why community is so important too. When we are all atomized and separated from each other, everyone in their own little bubble around the world, we never get a chance to see the underbelly of the country, the hidden slavery that persists when you go to get your Starbucks coffee in the morning, the way that we are all in bondage to each other instead of mutual aid to each other, because the capitalist system is one where I have to subjugate you and take advantage of you to get ahead. And this competition can be seen everywhere, from the adversarial nature of courtrooms and litigation to things as simple as sports teams that bring discord to players and fans across the country. These are the undertones of competition and dislike that are bred throughout our country through generations, so that the hate and withholding of help becomes second nature. The way fans will cheer on when a player gets injured. The way we realize we could actually all be better at our sports if we played together and not against each other. The same thing with competition in school. And yet there's been this completely false notion of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we need to face hard times to have good times. Most of the strife in our life is manufactured, and we are ultimately blindly and unconsciously following and sustaining a system that allows this slavery to continue to exist in our attitudes in ways that we interact with each other. So my ask, at the very least, that I force myself to do every day now is to give each other a little more grace. See yourself in each other. View other humans as your brothers and sisters and siblings and family and neighbors, not as random other people. We are all connected. And the moment we realize that and act that way, that's the moment this system of slavery and subjugation collapses, because we begin to look out for each other. We are no longer trying to petition another person to free a slave from a plantation. We go to that plantation itself and we free the slaves. Better yet, the guards and overseers now are educated and free the slaves themselves, because now they know and see that we all do better when we help each other, not hurt each other. And this could go into a whole nother discussion about the prison system and advocating for restorative justice instead of penalizing and forcing people into things like solitary confinement. But that's something that you can research, and I encourage you to. Realize that people don't just commit crimes to commit crimes or shoot up schools for fun. Everything is connected, and the reasoning might not be clear to the naked eye, but with further investigation, you will see that every action we take has a consequence on our environment, and the more we suffocate each other in this ugly system of slavery, the more hate we spread, the more ugliness we will see throughout our society. It's not the guns that are killing people, it's the people that are creating a terrible society based on subjugation that pushes people to their limits. The final point I'll make is on the topic of reparations. I think this is actually one of the most important topics to discuss because it's been a mainstream conversation for some time now. What are the reparations owed to the descendants of slaves and current slaves that are working without proper pay? And my response to that is simply, there will never be enough money produced or a sum of money workable in this capitalist system to provide or justify reparations. In a video I have coming out in the future, I'll talk about how capitalism works precisely because it works through hierarchy and destruction of populations of people, because if everyone had the same amount of money, then the money system would be pointless. There would be no way to exclude people from something or make things seem more rare because only a certain amount of people own things. But that is exactly where the logic of ownership, capitalism, and reparations fails. To provide reparations is to reinvest what would probably end up being tens of trillions of dollars back into a system of exploitation and subjugation that new people with new money would then be able to use to exploit the many for the benefit of the few. That's exactly what the system is intended to do. So until we realize that, we must come together as one people and share our most valuable resources, provide for each other, and abandon this outdated Darwinian view of natural selection and survival of the fittest, we will actually be able to make progress in the society. All of this other so-called progress that the largest corporations are preaching, like a recent blog post I saw by Sam Altman at OpenAI, are just red herrings. They're distractions to keep you enticed by yet another shiny object. It forces you to think, what do we really mean by human progress? Because if we changed our money system and how we distribute resources, we could end world hunger, poverty wouldn't exist, and we would end so many other diseases and mental health concerns that are a product of the way we live our lives. Companies that produce high sugar and fake foods won't be encouraged to do those things anymore because they aren't being rewarded for creating a product that they can deceive millions of people with by product placement ads and catchy songs and commercials that no one consents to view, but motivated instead by the idea of community, of love, of purpose in every human, and understanding that we are all just carbon beings with souls and no one person is more valuable than another. We are all different and valuable in unique ways. But as soon as we try to categorize and label and create a system where only one type of person is able to succeed at the expense of everyone else, we are actually stunning human growth and going in the opposite direction of progress. That's all I have for today's episode, and I would encourage you to leave comments if you know of any other stories of the conditions of slaves in prison in our jails today. And I know there are so many reports on the horrible conditions, the lockdowns, how the slaves were treated during COVID, the Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola. And I know there are likely so many more stories of slavery in the present day and the present day slave trade that goes unreported in mainstream conversations. These are the articles and stories I wish to bring to light for you all on this channel and in this podcast, and I hope that we can create this conversation and begin creating a new world outside of this false idea of the rule of law and of may the best man win, and of competition and hate and anger, and move toward the true idea of constant love and support, openly teaching each other what we know, healthy living habits, and see how amazing a society we can create will be. We may speak hundreds of languages, we may have different body types and come in all shapes and sizes, but we are all animals, we are all humans, and we all want and need the same things. Just like puppies, just like dolphins, just like bears, we are all one and all the same and all contribute to this environment. And we can no longer be a threat to ourselves and those around us. We must take a deep breath and think about our actions and give each other grace and start taking small steps toward mutual aid and getting rid of ownership toward a shared society and shared land without borders so that we can live as free and as safe and protected as a mother bear and her cubs. As the spiders, as the leaves that fall from the tree to the ground to feed the soil, to the waste that comes from our human bodies and reproduction that all contributes to the circle of life. Save yourself, save your neighbors. We are all siblings. Save our children. I'll see you in the next episode.